Hey everybody, welcome to Always Bored, Never Boring. Today I'm going to be looking at a simple way of making rivers for tabletop war games. I am specifically building rivers mainly for burrows and badgers and also for Rangers of Shadow Deep, so I'm going for a slightly sort of whimsical look, but I'm going to be using some pretty simple processes, and I'm looking at building these without purchasing any additional products beyond what I have, and I'm not going to be using water effects or anything that's designed purposefully for creating a water effect. These are going to be pretty basic, pretty simple, but the intention is that they get the job done and create situations on the tabletop quickly and easily. So I'm starting by getting some cardboard. I actually had a box that was exactly a foot long, so by getting the two flaps from the top of the box and the two flaps from the bottom, I had 4 lengths of cardboard that were about the width I needed and each a foot long, so enough to span a 4-foot tabletop. And what I'm doing first of all is I'm just using some PVA glue, some craft glue, and I am brushing it on with an old brush, so I'm not going to be ruining any of my decent brushes, and I'm just sealing the top side of the cardboard. So just giving that cardboard a good coating, and you may want to tape the edges of the card first, and with a bit of masking tape or something that might make things easier too, but I didn't do that here. But you just want to make sure that that cardboard is completely sealed. With that done, I'm setting the card aside for a moment, and I am using a polystyrene sealing tile here. These are very cheap. I picked up a pack of about 20 in a pound store many moons ago, and they're about the right thickness, and they've got a little bit of texture to them. So they're pretty good for making the bases for scenic elements. And what I want is some 2-inch strips. But I also want to mark an inch at the middle of each one, and that's because I need to make sure that when I've got the river sections placed together, the land elements will line up. So we're cutting 2-inch strips and then marking the middle. And you want to use a pretty sharp knife for this. My knife was a little bit on the blunt side, so I had a bit of a job to get neat cuts. But I didn't have another blade immediately to hand, so I persevered with a slightly blunt one. But it's okay, it doesn't need to be too neat. So that's a 2-inch strip cut, and now what I want to do is I want to make the bank of the river. So I'm angling my blade and I'm making a beveled edge, and I want to start with the cut in line with that 1-inch mark. Like I say, I want the land elements to line up, so the beginning and end of each bank needs to be 1 inch wide. Once you're past the start point, you can go to town, you can make it as wavy and wobbly as you like, as thick or as thin, but it needs to be 1 inch each end, or whatever measurements you have decided to use. And you can see I've got the blade at about 45 degrees, and I'm just cutting a irregular line to represent the riverbank. Again, obviously this is easier with a really sharp knife. Just be careful not to cut your fingers off. And what I also need to do is I need to bevel the other edge. I'm keeping this edge straight. This is the outside edge of the scenic element. So I'm just shaving off the corner to make it an embankment. And what I'm doing here, I'm just making straight lengths of river, but it's pretty much the same process if you want to do corners and anything else like that. When I'm cutting the second riverbank, I'm just using the first one that I cut just to eyeball kind of what the river's going to look like when it's laid out. And then if you've done that quickly, the glue you put on the cardboard may still be wet, but I'm applying a bit more onto the bottom of the polystyrene sections. And then we just position the banks on each side of the card, and this creates the rough shape of our 1 foot length of river. And what we need to do now, we need to seal this completely. So we're going to be using a lot more PVA glue. I got a massive bottle of PVA glue from a pound shop, and that's the best thing to do really. Get a cheap big bottle. The bigger and cheaper the better, because this sort of thing does use a lot of glue. But I'm just going to slosh it over the whole thing, and I'm going to make sure that the embankments, the polystyrene sections, are really well covered. That's going to stop them flaking and breaking apart, but it's also going to completely seal them. As well as doing the top, you will need to seal the bottom as well, and you also need to make sure you get all around the edges. And then when that's all completely dry, you just need to slap some brown paint on the riverbanks, whatever you've got. I'm using some very old Citadel paints that I don't use anymore. It's better not to use your brand new expensive Citadel paints because it can use a lot of them and they're expensive, so any junky old brown paint will do. Almost none of this brown paint will be seen when it's finished. It's just if there's any patchy areas, you might see a little bit of brown showing through, so you do want to have all of those white areas covered. And then I'm using some old Army Painter paints here to paint the river. I've got a very dark blue here, and that will be the base coat. And I just want to make sure that whole river section is completely covered so that there is no brown showing through. There is no cardboard showing. And when that's dry, I wanted to add a little bit of texture to the water, and I had the brainwave of using a hot glue gun to create a ripple effect. And I'm not entirely sure how successful it is. I'm not entirely convinced by it. You don't have to have a ripple effect in your water if you don't want. You could do it all with paint effects, or just leave it smooth, a still length of water. But yeah, I'm not 100% sold on this technique, but I thought it was something worth trying, and yeah, here it is. Let me know in the comments what you think. I think possibly someone with a more artistic skill than I have could make this look quite nice. But you can see the sort of effect you're getting there. You're just getting little raised areas, little ripples, creating a sense of movement in the water. We're now going to paint that. I'm using a lighter blue from the Army Painter range here. Again, these are paints that I don't use in my day-to-day painting, so I'm just using them up on this sort of thing. And I'm just roughly covering the ripples. And then again, a lighter Army Painter blue and a more focused sort of highlight over those ripples. I'm also going to put a few very light lines on some of the flat areas as well, just to create more sense of movement. Just sort of eyeballing it, just trying to make it look a little bit like flowing water. And then, when that's completely dry, I'm covering the whole thing with a mix of Athonian Camo Shade and Nuln Oil, just a little bit of Nuln Oil, mainly Athonian Camo Shade, just to tone down the blues really, to tie the blues together, the various different shades that I've used, but also to tone down the blueness, add a little bit of green to it, because obviously rivers in real life are not a brilliant blue colour. They have algae and they have vegetation, that sort of thing. And then finally, I've got some very thinned down white scar here, and I am just applying that just over the top of the ripples, just to create a highlight sort of foaming effect. But this will finish the painting of the water. And then I've got a gloss lacquer here, a gloss varnish, and I have this because when I first started painting miniatures again, many years ago, I really liked the look of old tin soldiers. I have a fascination for old tin soldiers that have that gloss look. And I was painting Bretonnians, and I decided I wanted them to be glossy. I no longer paint miniatures with a glossy finish, mainly because I got fed up of people telling me that, you know, you can put a matte varnish over the top of that, and not realising that I actually wanted them to be a very glossy finish. So yeah, I use matte varnishes now, but I still have this gloss varnish, and I'm just applying it over the water just to make it more shimmery, more glossy. And of course it will also strengthen the whole thing and protect that paint that's on there. So you can see it's shining. And now we need to deal with the riverbanks. So I've got some brown stones here. I actually bought these in a garden centre at Christmas time when they had the fibre optic villages and things like that out on display. And that whole jar cost me £1. And again, we're using some more PVA glue because we haven't used enough so far in this build. And I'm applying it on the sloping sides of the banks. And I'm not being too fussy about it. It's going onto the water a little bit, but it's mainly covering those sloped sides. And then I'm just going to pour the stones directly onto it, making sure I get good coverage. Obviously, excess stones can be tipped off when this is dry and used again, so it doesn't matter how much you pour on at the moment. And when the excess is tipped off, that's what you've got. You can see a little bit of it also caught on the waves and things where there was little splashes of gloss that hadn't quite dried, and that's fine, just adds to the overall effect. We're now going to do the tops of the riverbanks, and for this we're painting the whole thing with PVA glue. Again. Trying not to cover up all those stones that we've just applied. And then I've got some Javis Countryside Scenic here. This is their spring mix, number 71, I believe. And I'm just going to pour this all over the banks, all over the sides, making sure everything that is just a painted brown is completely covered. And again, it doesn't matter how much you pour on, because when the glue dries, you can tip off the excess, scoop it back up, put it back in the bag, and use it again next time. It's better to make sure you've got a really good coverage. And that's pretty much it. That's the river done. I'm just going to use some scenic cement here, which is basically watered down PVA glue, and I'm going to spray that over the flock on the banks, and then I will mop up any excess that goes onto the water. And that's it. When it's completely dry, it's ready for use. I wanted to have a bridge for this piece of river, and I couldn't be bothered to make one. Luckily, I have the old Games Workshop Hobbit starter set, which has a very nice scenic element, which is a set of wooden gangways. And I'm just going to paint those up. I'm not going to do that in this video, but I'm just showing you here what the intention is. When you have the two ramps, you can put them together, and they will span the river, and they will be a more than adequate bridge, which saves me having to make one. So yeah, that will be my next project, is painting that up just with a simple brown colour scheme, just to get it to the table. And that's it. That's my quick and easy rivers. I know they're not the greatest things in the world, but hopefully some people have found this interesting. Thank you so much for watching. If you have enjoyed the video, please consider pressing the like button. If you have really enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing if you don't already do so. And hopefully I will see you all again very soon. Bye bye everyone. Bye bye.